Everyone stood frozen, wine glasses suspended midair as my father's words echoed through the elegantly decorated ballroom. My biggest disappointment. 3 words that shouldn't have had the power to wound me anymore, but somehow still cut deep. I clutched the envelope in my hand, knuckles turning white, as 60 pairs of eyes avoided meeting mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I'm 35 years old and a forensic genealogist, someone who uses DNA analysis to solve family mysteries and cold cases. Ironic, considering the family mystery I'd been unraveling for months had nothing to do with my clients and everything to do with the man who just publicly humiliated me at his own 70th birthday celebration. Growing up in Westfield, Connecticut had been the epitome of upper-middle-class suburban perfection, at least on the surface. Our colonial-style home with its manicured lawn and white picket fence painted the picture of the ideal American family. My father, Richard Mitchell, was a respected cardiothoracic surgeon whose reputation in the medical community was unmatched. My mother, Eleanor, was the quintessential doctor's wife, involved in every charity event, every school function, every country club gathering. And then there was me, the perpetual disappointment. The daughter who could never quite measure up to the impossibly high standards set before her. "Rebecca, darling, do try to keep your shoulders back," my mother would whisper at social gatherings, her smile never faltering. "And perhaps mention your work with less enthusiasm. No one wants to hear about DNA extraction over dinner." My father's criticisms were less subtle. B+ in advanced biology? "Medical schools don't accept mediocrity, Rebecca," he'd say, sliding my report card back across the kitchen island with barely a glance. "Your cousin Melissa is already being courted by Johns Hopkins, and you can't even maintain a perfect GPA." The truth was, I had never wanted to be a doctor. The sight of blood made me queasy, and the thought of holding someone's life in my hands terrified me. But in the Mitchell family, medicine wasn't just a career. It was a legacy. My grandfather had been a surgeon, my father was a surgeon, and my younger brother Tyler was well on his way to becoming one too. Tyler. The golden child. The son who had never experienced our father's disappointment. While I struggled to earn a simple nod of approval, Tyler received standing ovations for the most mundane achievements. When he announced his acceptance to Harvard Medical School, my father actually wept with pride, something I'd never witnessed in my 25 years of existence at that point. "That's my boy," he'd said, clapping Tyler on the shoulder. Carrying on the Mitchell tradition of excellence. I stood in the corner that day, clutching my master's degree in forensic science from Yale, a prestigious accomplishment by any normal standard, but merely an afterthought in our household. No one had attended my graduation ceremony. My father had an emergency surgery, my mother had a charity luncheon, and Tyler had an important exam. At least, those were the excuses they'd given. "Rebecca." A soft voice pulled me back to the present moment. My mother stood beside me, her expertly applied makeup, unable to hide the concern in her eyes. "Don't make a scene, dear. You know how your father gets after a few scotches. He doesn't mean it." But he did mean it. He always meant it. And tonight, after decades of enduring his casual cruelty, I had finally reached my breaking point. "Excuse me," I said, gently removing my mother's hand from my arm. The envelope burned in my grip, the results of 6 months of secret investigation tucked neatly inside. The truth that would change everything. The grand ballroom of the Westfield Country Club sparkled with expensive decorations. 70 golden balloons hovered near the ceiling, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly in the corner, though the music had faltered momentarily when my father had made his announcement. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight," he had said, raising his glass of 30-year-old scotch. "My wonderful wife Eleanor, who has stood by me for 45 years. My son Tyler, who has made me proud every single day of his life." He paused, his eyes finding me in the crowd. "And Rebecca, who... well, at least she tried her best, which I suppose is all we can ask for from our biggest disappointment." A few uncomfortable chuckles had rippled through the crowd. People who thought he was joking, making some ill-conceived attempt at humor. But I knew better. I saw the truth in his eyes, the genuine belief that I was somehow less than, a failure who hadn't lived up to the Mitchell name. I made my way across the room now, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each determined step. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, sensing the tension, the anticipation of confrontation. My father stood on the small stage, still basking in the applause that had followed his speech, still wearing that self-satisfied smile that I had grown to resent. "Dad?" I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'd like to say a few words, if that's okay." Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by annoyance. "Rebecca, this isn't the time for one of your episodes." He always referred to my attempts to stand up for myself as episodes, as if emotional self-preservation was a psychological disorder. "Actually," I replied, taking the microphone from his hand, "I think this is exactly the right time. After all, what better occasion than your 70th birthday to finally hear the truth?" The room fell silent. Even the string quartet stopped playing, sensing that something momentous was about to unfold. "For 35 years," I began, my voice echoing through the ballroom, "I've tried to understand why nothing I did was ever good enough for you. Why Tyler could do no wrong, while I could do no right. Why you looked at him with pride and at me with disappointment." My father's face reddened, a vein throbbing at his temple. "Rebecca, that's enough." "No," I interrupted, something I had never dared to do before. "It's not nearly enough, not after what I've discovered." I held up the envelope. 6 months ago, I started noticing discrepancies in our family medical history while working on a case. Little things that didn't add up. The Mitchell family has a history of heart disease, yet I've never shown any markers for it in my annual checkups. Tyler has Dad's blood type, but mine doesn't match either of my parents, something that was explained away as a rare genetic occurrence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mother's face had gone deathly pale. My father stood rigid, his hands gripping the podium with white knuckles. At first, I thought it was just an interesting genealogical puzzle, the kind I solve for clients every day. But then I remembered something. A conversation I overheard when I was 12, between you and Mom. You were arguing about the arrangement and how it was supposed to remain a secret forever. My mother took a step forward. "Rebecca, please." I ran my own DNA test. I continued, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. And then I ran comparative analyses against samples I collected from both of you. Samples you never knew I took. A strand of hair from a brush. A discarded coffee cup. Standard practice in my line of work. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the wait staff had stopped moving. Trays of champagne held motionless as they watched the drama unfold. "Would you like to know what I found, Dad? Or should I even call you that?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My father's face had lost all color now, the confident surgeon replaced by a man who looked suddenly older than his 70 years. "Rebecca, stop this right now. You're making a fool of yourself." "Am I?" I opened the envelope with deliberate slowness, pulling out the papers inside. "Because according to these results, we share exactly 0% genetic material. You are not my biological father." The gasps were audible. Someone dropped a glass, the shattering sound punctuating my revelation like an exclamation point. That's impossible," my father stammered, but his eyes told a different story. They darted to my mother, who had sunk into a nearby chair, her head in her hands. "Is it impossible, Dad? Or is it the reason you've resented me my entire life? Because every time you looked at me, you were reminded that I'm not a Mitchell by blood. That I'm living proof of some secret you and Mom have kept buried for 35 years? Tyler pushed through the crowd then, his handsome face contorted with confusion. "What are you talking about, Becca? This is crazy." I turned to my brother, my half-brother, according to the DNA results. "Is it crazy, Tyler? Haven't you ever wondered why Dad treats us so differently? Why nothing I do is ever good enough, while you can do no wrong?" "Because I worked harder," Tyler shot back, though uncertainty clouded his eyes. "Because I followed the path that was expected of me." "No," I said softly. It's because every time Dad looks at you, he sees himself, his legacy, his future. And every time he looks at me, he sees a reminder of Mom's infidelity. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. My mother finally stood, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice barely audible. "Richard, tell them it wasn't like that." My father seemed to age a decade in the span of seconds. His shoulders slumped, the arrogance draining from his posture. "Eleanor, don't. They deserve to know the truth," my mother insisted, finding her courage. She turned to face the stunned crowd, our family, friends, and colleagues who were witnessing the implosion of our carefully constructed facade. Richard and I, we had trouble conceiving after Tyler. Years of trying, years of disappointment. We looked into every option, but Richard was adamant. It had to be his biological child or nothing. I felt as if the floor was shifting beneath my feet. This wasn't the revelation I had expected. I had prepared myself for the disclosure of an affair, a betrayal, not whatever my mother was about to reveal. "We used a sperm donor," my mother continued, her voice growing stronger. "An anonymous medical student from Yale with an exemplary record. It was supposed to be our secret forever." She looked at me, tears glistening in her eyes. "Rebecca, you were wanted, you were planned. You weren't a mistake or a betrayal." I struggled to process this new information. Not an affair, but a clinical arrangement. A decision made by both my parents. Which meant, "If you both decided this," I said slowly, turning back to my father, "then why? Why treat me like I was never good enough? Why call me your disappointment?" The room held its collective breath, waiting for his answer. My father, the man who had shaped my self-worth with his constant criticism, looked at me directly for what felt like the first time. "Because you reminded me of my failure," he said quietly. "Every time I looked at you, I saw what I couldn't provide. What I had to outsource to some nameless, faceless medical student. A stranger's child in my home, carrying my name but not my blood. The cruelty of it stole my breath. To be rejected not for who I was but for what I represented to his wounded male pride. So instead of dealing with your own issues," I said, my voice trembling now, "you spent 35 years punishing me for simply existing, for being a constant reminder of what you consider your greatest failure as a man." The truth hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. Decades of emotional abuse explained in a single moment of clarity. "All those years," I continued, "all those accomplishments you dismissed. My graduation from Yale, which, ironically, is where my biological father attended medical school, my successful career solving cold cases and reuniting families. None of it mattered because I wasn't really yours." Tyler stepped forward again, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "You knew about this," he demanded of our father. "You've been punishing Becca her entire life because of a decision you and Mom made together?" For the first time in my memory, my father couldn't meet his son's eyes. The golden child was finally seeing the tarnish on his idol. "It was complicated," my father muttered. "No," Tyler shot back, "it was cruel, and I was too blind to see it." He moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine in a show of solidarity I had never expected. "Becca is the most brilliant person I know. Do you have any idea what she does? She solves mysteries that no one else can. She brings closure to families who have waited decades for answers. And you've made her feel worthless because of your own insecurities." I squeezed Tyler's hand, grateful for his support but still reeling from the revelations. The birthday celebration was in shambles around us, guests whispering and shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or flee from this public family meltdown. My father's face had settled into a stony mask, his surgeon's composure attempting to reassert itself. "This is hardly the time or place for this discussion," he said coldly. "You've ruined my birthday celebration with your dramatics, Rebecca, as usual." "Richard!" My mother's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough. For once in your life, put aside your pride and really see your daughter. She's not my—" "Yes, she is," my mother interrupted fiercely. Biology isn't what makes a family. Love is. Acceptance is. And you failed at both. A heavy silence fell over the room. Guests began to quietly gather their belongings, sensing that the celebration was definitively over. The caterers looked to each other in confusion, unsure whether to continue serving or to start packing up. I stood my ground, the DNA results still clutched in my hand. 35 years of seeking approval from a man who had decided before I was even born that I would never receive it. 35 years of comparing myself to Tyler, of trying to be perfect, of wondering why my best was never enough. I didn't come here tonight to ruin your birthday, I said finally. I came looking for answers. And now I have them. I carefully folded the papers and returned them to the envelope. I won't apologize for existing, Dad. Not anymore. And I won't spend another day trying to earn the love that should have been freely given. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. Rebecca, he said, softer now. Wait. I paused, but didn't turn back. I'd spent my whole life waiting for approval, waiting for acceptance, waiting for love that never came. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, and I heard something in his voice I'd never heard before. Uncertainty. Vulnerability. I'm not sure you can, I replied honestly. Some things, once broken, stay that way. But families don't have to, my mother interjected, moving to stand between us. Families can heal, if everyone is willing to do the work. I finally turned back to face them, my mother with her pleading eyes, my father with his shattered pride, Tyler with his newfound understanding. My family, dysfunctional and damaged as we were. I've spent my career helping people uncover family secrets, I said. I've seen what those secrets can do, how they can poison relationships across generations. But I've also seen what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Sometimes it destroys everything, and sometimes it creates space for something new to grow. Tyler finished for me, squeezing my hand. My father took a tentative step toward me. For a moment, I thought he might actually embrace me, something he hadn't done since I was a small child. Instead, he stopped, maintaining the emotional distance that had always defined our relationship. I don't know how to be different, he said stiffly. I don't know how to undo 35 years of my own failings. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Start by trying, I suggested. Start by seeing me as Rebecca, not as a reminder of what you couldn't do, but as a person who has accomplished things on her own terms. Start by being proud of the daughter you raised, even if you didn't create her. The remaining guests had fallen completely silent, witnesses to this raw moment of potential transformation. My mother reached out, taking both my hand and my father's, creating a physical connection where an emotional one had been severed long ago. We can do better, she promised. All of us. Starting today. I wasn't naive enough to believe that one dramatic confrontation could heal decades of wounds. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, one interaction at a time. Patterns would have to be broken consciously, with effort and awareness. My father would need to confront his own insecurities, his toxic pride, his narrow definition of what constituted family and legacy. And I would need to learn how to exist in this new reality, no longer seeking the approval I now understood had been withheld for reasons that had nothing to do with my worth. But as we stood there in that moment, surrounded by the remnants of a birthday celebration that had become something far more significant, I felt something I hadn't experienced in my father's presence before. Possibility. The possibility of change. The possibility of healing. The possibility of a relationship built on truth rather than secrets and resentment. Happy birthday, Dad, I said quietly. And for the first time in 35 years, I thought I saw a glimmer of genuine acknowledgement in his eyes. Not pride, not yet, but recognition. A beginning. Sometimes the most powerful moments in our lives come not from achieving success or reaching goals, but from finally confronting the truths we've been running from. In that elegant ballroom, surrounded by scattered birthday decorations and shocked onlookers, I had finally found the answer to the question that had haunted me my entire life. I wasn't a disappointment. I was simply a mirror, reflecting back a truth that one man had been unable to face. And in the shattering of that mirror, perhaps we could all finally see each other clearly. The silence in the room was suffocating as the weight of my revelations settled over the crowd. My father stood frozen on the stage, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. I had spent my entire life trying to earn his approval, and in one explosive moment, I had shattered the illusion of our perfect family. "I think we should continue this conversation in private," my mother suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced nervously at the remaining guests who were pretending not to stare at our family drama unfolding before them. "Why?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. "So we can sweep it under the rug like everything else? So we can pretend this never happened and go back to our roles? Dad the disappointed patriarch, you the silent enabler, Tyler the golden child, and me the eternal failure?" Tyler winced at my words, a flash of guilt crossing his features. All these years he had basked in our father's approval without questioning why I was treated so differently. Was he complicit in my suffering through his silence? The thought hung between us, unspoken but palpable. "Rebecca," my father said, his voice lacking its usual authority, "this isn't the time." "When is the time, Dad?" I interrupted. "When has there ever been a time in the past 35 years when you were willing to acknowledge how you've made me feel? When you've been willing to see me as anything other than a disappointment?" The elegant ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers and golden decorations, suddenly felt stifling. Guests began to quietly exit, mumbling awkward goodbyes and avoiding eye contact. The carefully orchestrated celebration had devolved into something raw and uncomfortable, a public unraveling of decades of suppressed truth. My father stepped down from the stage, his usual commanding presence diminished. For the first time in my life he looked old, vulnerable, human. "We should go to the study," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. It wasn't a command this time, but a request. I hesitated, still clutching the DNA results in my hand. Part of me wanted to continue this confrontation publicly, to force him to acknowledge his behavior in front of everyone who had witnessed his casual cruelty over the years. But another part, the part that still, despite everything, longed for resolution, nodded in agreement. "Fine," I said. The study. My mother quickly directed the catering staff to continue serving drinks and dessert to the few remaining guests, maintaining the pretense of normalcy, even as our family retreated to handle our private implosion. Tyler followed silently behind us, his usual confidence shaken by the revelations of the evening. The study had always been my father's domain, a masculine sanctuary of leather-bound books, expensive whiskey, and medical journals. As children, Tyler and I had only been permitted to enter when summoned, usually for a lecture on some perceived failure, or, in Tyler's case, to receive praise for his latest achievement. My father closed the heavy oak door behind us, the soft click sealing us in together with 3 decades of unspoken truths. The familiar scent of leather and oak enveloped us as we took our positions. My father behind his massive desk, my mother perched uncertainly on the leather sofa, Tyler leaning against a bookshelf, and me standing, unwilling to settle into the role of the chastised child. "You had no right," my father began, his voice low and controlled, "to ambush us like this. To air our private matters in front of colleagues and friends. And you had no right," I countered, "to emotionally abuse me for 35 years because of a decision you made before I was even born." My mother flinched at the word abuse, but she didn't contradict me. The silence that followed was an acknowledgement that cut deeper than any argument could have. "It wasn't. I didn't." My father struggled, unused to defending himself. "You don't understand what it was like." "Then explain it to me," I challenged him. "Help me understand why my existence has been such a disappointment to you." My father looked away, his eyes landing on the wall of family photographs. I followed his gaze to a particular image. My parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful. My father in his military uniform before he began medical school. My mother radiant in her simple white dress. "We were so young," he said softly. "So full of plans. A big family, a legacy of Mitchells in medicine. It was all mapped out." He turned back to me, his expression unreadable. And then nothing went according to plan. "Richard had reproductive issues," my mother interjected gently. "After Tyler, we tried for years. Multiple treatments, specialists, experimental procedures. But nothing worked," my father continued, his voice tight with old pain. "Because the problem was me, my inadequacy." The word hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning. For a man like my father, whose identity was so wrapped up in traditional notions of masculinity and success, the inability to father more children had been a devastating blow to his ego. "So you punished me for it," I said, connecting the dots. "You resented me because my very existence reminded you of what you saw as your failure as a man." "It wasn't that simple," he insisted, though his eyes told a different story. "Wasn't it?" I pressed. "Every time you looked at me, you saw evidence of your inadequacy. Every time you had to introduce me as your daughter, you were reminded that biologically I wasn't. And instead of dealing with your own issues, you projected them onto me. Made me feel like I was never enough, could never be enough." Tyler pushed himself away from the bookshelf, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Dad, is this true? You've been treating Becca like this because of your own insecurities?" My father didn't answer immediately. He walked to the crystal decanter on the side table and poured himself a generous measure of whiskey, buying time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. "I didn't consciously do it," he admitted. "It wasn't a decision I made to treat her differently. It just happened. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded." "That's not good enough," Tyler said firmly, surprising me with his support. "Do you have any idea what you've done to her? The psychological damage you've inflicted?" Becca graduated top of her class at Yale. She's built a successful career helping people find answers about their families. She's amazing, Dad, and you've made her feel worthless her entire life. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at hearing my brother defend me so passionately. All these years, I had resented Tyler for his golden child status, never considering that he might have been oblivious to the disparity in our treatment. "I know what I've accomplished," I said quietly. "My issue isn't that I don't know my worth. It's that the people who should have valued me the most, my family, made me feel like I had none." My mother rose from the sofa and crossed the room to stand beside me, her hand tentatively reaching for mine. "I failed you too," she admitted. "I saw what was happening, and I didn't stop it. I told myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that you were strong, that you would be fine." She squeezed my hand. "I was wrong, and I'm so sorry, Rebecca." The simple acknowledgement, the validation that yes, this had happened, and yes, it was wrong, felt like a key unlocking something tight and painful inside my chest. For decades, I had wondered if I was imagining it, if I was being overly sensitive, if the problem was me rather than them. Hearing my mother confirm that the emotional neglect had been real was both painful and strangely liberating. My father remained behind his desk, physically and emotionally separated from this moment of connection. The whiskey in his glass caught the light as he swirled it absently, his expression troubled. "I don't know how to fix this," he finally said, echoing his earlier words from the ballroom. "Maybe you can't fix 35 years of damage in one night," I replied. "But you could start by trying to understand the impact your behavior has had. You could start by seeing me as a person, not as a symbol of your perceived failure." "You want an apology," he stated flatly. "I want acknowledgement." I corrected him. "I want you to see what you've done, and take responsibility for it. And yes, an apology would be nice, but only if it's genuine." My father set down his glass with deliberate care. For a moment, I thought he might dismiss me again, retreat into the defensive posture that had characterized our relationship for so long. Instead, he sank heavily into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "I was raised to believe that family meant blood," he said slowly. that a man's legacy lived on through his biological children. When we discovered I couldn't father any more children after Tyler, it felt like a death sentence for part of me. He looked up at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. But that doesn't excuse what I did to you, how I made you feel. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more honesty than he had ever offered me before. More vulnerability than I had ever witnessed from the imposing figure who had shaped so much of my self-perception. The irony, I said, is that as a forensic genealogist, I've learned that family is about far more than DNA. I've helped adoptees find birth parents who wanted nothing to do with them. I've reunited siblings separated for decades who form instant, powerful bonds. I've seen families created through love and choice that are stronger than many biological ones. I paused, letting the words sink in. Biology is just science. Family is something else entirely. Tyler moved to stand beside me, completing our strange family tableau, my mother and brother flanking me, my father isolated behind his desk. "We're still a family," Tyler said firmly. "DNA doesn't change that. What changes is how we move forward from here." My father looked at the three of us, something unreadable flickering across his features. "I don't know if I can change," he admitted quietly. "Not completely. Not overnight." "No one's asking for overnight," I said. "Just for effort. For awareness. For a willingness to try." A heavy silence fell over the study as my father considered my words. Outside, we could faintly hear the remaining party guests, the muted sounds of classical music and polite conversation continuing as if our world hadn't just been fundamentally altered. "I have a question," Tyler said suddenly. "The donor, do you know anything about him? Beyond that, he was a Yale medical student?" My mother glanced at my father, who nodded slightly, giving permission for her to share what they knew. "He was in his final year of medical school," she said. "Top of his class. Tall, with dark hair and—" "Your eyes, Rebecca." She smiled faintly. "That's what drew me to his profile, actually. He had these remarkable blue-green eyes, intelligent and kind. I had never considered that my distinctive eye color, so different from my parents, and Tyler's brown eyes, came from my biological father. It was strange to think of this unknown man, this medical student, who had donated genetic material decades ago, never knowing that his decision had resulted in me. "Did you ever try to find out who he was?" I asked. "After I was born?" My mother shook her head. The agreement was strict anonymity. He didn't know who received his donation, and we didn't know his identity beyond the basic profile information. It was cleaner that way. She glanced at my father. "Or so we thought. Have you ever wondered about him?" Tyler asked me. "Your biological father?" The question took me by surprise. In the whirlwind of discovering the truth and confronting my parents, I hadn't had time to process my own feelings about the nameless, faceless man whose DNA I carried. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I've spent my career helping other people find their biological relatives. I never imagined I'd be in the same position." "Could you find him?" Tyler pressed. "With your skills and resources?" I considered the question. "Possibly. DNA databases have grown exponentially in recent years. If he or any close relatives have ever submitted samples to commercial genetic testing companies, there's a chance I could identify him through genetic matching and genealogical research. Would you want to?" My mother asked softly. I looked at my father, trying to gauge his reaction to this line of discussion. His face remained carefully neutral, but I could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "I don't know," I repeated. "This is all still new. I need time to process everything before I make any decisions about searching for him." My father cleared his throat. "If you did decide to look for him," he said stiffly, "I wouldn't oppose it." The concession, small as it was, represented a significant shift. The Richard Mitchell I had known my entire life would have bristled at the mere suggestion, would have seen it as a betrayal of the family narrative he had worked so hard to maintain. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "But right now, I'm more concerned with healing the relationships I already have than in finding new ones." Something shifted in my father's expression then, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his perpetually tight jaw. "I've been wrong," he said finally, "about many things, about what makes a family, about what constitutes a legacy." He stood up from behind his desk, no longer using it as a barrier between us. "And most of all, about you, Rebecca." The use of my full name, not Becca, or the dismissive young lady he often employed, felt significant. A small acknowledgement of my adulthood, my autonomy. "I can't undo the past," he continued. "I can't take back the words I've said or the damage I've done. But I can try to do better, starting now." It wasn't the dramatic apology scene from a movie, with tears and embraces and instant forgiveness. It was messy and incomplete and tentative, much like real life, much like real families. But it was a beginning. "That's all any of us can do," my mother said, her voice stronger now. "Try to do better going forward." Tyler reached out, taking my hand in his right and my father's in his left, creating a physical connection between us. "We're the Mitchells," he said firmly. "All of us. DNA, be damned." A small smile tugged at the corners of my father's mouth. Not his usual confident smirk, but something more genuine, more vulnerable. "DNA be damned," he echoed softly. We stood there in the study, our family of four connected by Tyler's gesture, each of us processing the seismic shift that had occurred in our relationships. Decades of resentment and hurt couldn't be erased in a single evening, but perhaps they could begin to be addressed, acknowledged, healed. "We should probably return to the party," my mother said eventually. "What's left of it, anyway?" "And say what?" I asked. "How do we explain what just happened out there?" My father straightened his shoulders, some of his usual composure returning. "We tell the truth," he said, surprising me. "A simplified version, perhaps, but the truth nonetheless. That we've had a family revelation that we're working through together. That we appreciate their attendance but understand if they wish to leave." "Together," Tyler repeated, squeezing both our hands before releasing them. "That's the key word here." As we prepared to return to the remains of the birthday celebration, my father paused at the study door. "Rebecca," he said, turning to face me, "what you said out there, about being my biggest disappointment, I want you to know that it's not true. It never was. You literally said those exact words less than an hour ago." I reminded him, not unkindly, he had the grace to look ashamed. "I did. And I was wrong. The truth is, my biggest disappointment has always been myself. My inability to see beyond my own pride and insecurities. My failure to appreciate the remarkable daughter I was fortunate enough to raise." He met my eyes directly. "You were never the disappointment, Rebecca. I was." The words washed over me like a wave, simultaneously painful and cleansing. For 35 years, I had carried the weight of his disapproval, had internalized the belief that I was somehow fundamentally lacking. To hear him finally take responsibility, to acknowledge that the failure had been his rather than mine, felt like the first step toward a liberation I had never thought possible. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "It matters." We rejoined what remained of the party, a significantly smaller crowd of close family friends and relatives who had chosen to stay despite the drama. Curious eyes followed us as we entered, speculation rippling through the room. My father approached the small stage once more, his posture straight but no longer rigid with pride. "Thank you all for your patience," he addressed the room. "As you've no doubt gathered, our family has experienced some unexpected revelations this evening. We appreciate your understanding as we work through this together." Together. The word echoed in my mind as I stood beside my family, no longer relegated to the background, no longer the afterthought in family gatherings. For the first time in my memory, we presented a united front, not perfect, not without damage, but connected in a way we hadn't been before. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversations and subdued celebrations. The elaborate birthday party my mother had planned was effectively over, replaced by something more authentic, if less festive. A few close friends approached me, offering quiet words of support, or simply a meaningful look that acknowledged the courage it had taken to speak my truth. As the last guests departed, I found myself alone on the terrace, gazing up at the stars that dotted the Connecticut sky. The cool night air was a relief after the emotional intensity of the evening, giving me space to breathe, to process, to begin integrating this new reality into my understanding of myself and my family. "May I join you?" My father's voice came from behind me, uncertain in a way I had never heard before. I nodded, not turning around, and he moved to stand beside me at the terrace railing. "It's a beautiful night," he observed, filling the silence with a neutral observation. Yes, I agreed. We stood there for a moment, father and daughter, genetically unrelated but bound by 35 years of shared history, both painful and profound. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what you said regarding family being more than DNA. About your work helping people find their biological relatives while honoring their chosen families." I turned to look at him, curious where this was heading. "It's important work," he continued. "Work that matters. Work that helps people heal and find closure." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I've never told you this, but I'm proud of what you've built. Your career, your reputation in your field. It's remarkable." The word hung in the night air between us. Remarkable. Not disappointing, not inadequate, remarkable. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. "That means a lot, coming from you." My father nodded, his profile outlined against the night sky. "I know it doesn't erase the past, but I hope it might be a step toward a better future." I thought about the long road ahead of us, the difficult conversations still to be had, the patterns that would need to be consciously broken, the trust that would need to be rebuilt. But I also thought about the possibility that had opened up this evening, the possibility of a relationship with my father based on truth rather than pretense, on mutual respect rather than constant judgment. "A step," I agreed. "The first of many, I hope." My father smiled then, not his usual confident smile for photographs and social occasions, but something smaller, more genuine. "Happy birthday to me," he said wryly, 70 years old and only just beginning to learn what truly matters. As we stood there under the stars, I realized that the truth, painful as it had been, had set all of us free in different ways. My father, from the burden of his decades-long resentment. My mother, from the weight of the secret she had kept. Tyler, from his unwitting role in our family's dysfunction. And me, from the belief that I would never be enough. The DNA results that had seemed so earth-shattering hours ago now felt almost secondary to the emotional truths we had finally confronted. Biology had shaped our physical selves, but it was our choices, past, present, and future, that would determine who we truly were as individuals and as a family. "To new beginnings," I said softly, echoing the inscription I had imagined for my father's birthday gift, a gift that now seemed almost prescient in its message. "To new beginnings." My father agreed, his voice carrying a promise that, for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to believe he might actually keep. 3 weeks had passed since my father's explosive 70th birthday party. The elegant ballroom, crystal chandeliers, and shocked guests seemed like a distant dream now, or perhaps a necessary nightmare we had all needed to endure to finally break free from decades of falsehood and resentment. I sat at my desk in the converted industrial loft that housed Ancestry Answers, the forensic genealogy business I had built from the ground up. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the organized chaos of my workspace. DNA test results, family trees spread across multiple monitors, reference books stacked in precise piles. This was my domain, where I helped others unravel the mysteries of their genetic heritage, while my own had remained a question mark until recently. The unexpected chime of the office door pulled me from my thoughts. My assistant, Zoe, wasn't due for another hour, and we had no clients scheduled this early. I glanced up to see my father standing awkwardly in the doorway, a cardboard drink carrier in one hand and a paper bag in the other. "I brought coffee," he said, his usual commanding tone replaced by something more tentative. "And those almond croissants you used to like as a kid. Do you still?" "I do," I replied, surprised by both his presence and his memory of such a small detail from my childhood. "Come in." He navigated through the office carefully, as if afraid to disturb the ordered system of my professional life. It struck me that this was the first time he had ever visited my workplace. Despite my company's growing reputation and success, he had never shown interest in seeing where or how I spent my days. "This is impressive," he said, setting the coffee and pastries on the one clear corner of my desk. His eyes roamed over the framed accolades on the walls, the sophisticated equipment, the evidence of a thriving business. Very professional. "That's high praise coming from you," I noted, accepting the coffee he offered. "What brings you here, Dad? Is everything okay?" Quote, he settled into the chair across from me, his posture stiff but his expression open in a way I wasn't accustomed to seeing. "Everything's fine. I just wanted to see where you work. What you do?" He gestured to the surrounding office. "You've built something significant here, Rebecca. Something important." The compliment, delivered without qualification or comparison to Tyler's achievements, felt foreign but welcome. Since the night of the party, small changes had begun to manifest in our interactions, my father making visible efforts to see me as an individual rather than a disappointment, to acknowledge my accomplishments without diminishing them. "Thank you," I said simply, taking a sip of the coffee he'd brought, prepared exactly how I liked it, with almond milk and a touch of cinnamon. Another small surprise. "Did Mom tell you how I take my coffee?" A hint of a smile crossed his face. "I asked Tyler, actually. He said you've always been particular about it." My father cleared his throat. "I've been trying to pay attention. To learn things about you that I should have known all along." The admission hung between us, both an acknowledgement of past neglect and a tentative step towards something new. I broke off a piece of the almond croissant, buying myself time to process this unfamiliar version of my father, one who brought breakfast, who asked questions about my preferences, who made efforts to bridge the chasm between us. "I've been doing some reading," he continued when I didn't immediately respond, "about family dynamics, about the impact of parental favoritism on children's development." He looked down at his own untouched coffee. "The research is quite clear. The damage is significant." "Clinical to the end," I observed, but without the bitterness that would have colored such a comment just weeks ago. "Always approaching things like a medical case study." He acknowledged this with a slight nod. "It's how I make sense of things. But I'm trying to understand the emotional aspects too, not just the psychological theory." He met my eyes directly. "I'm trying, Rebecca." "I know you are," I said, and meant it. The effort, imperfect as it was, mattered. My father took a careful sip of his coffee, then set it aside. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small, worn leather notebook and placed it on the desk between us. "It belonged to my father, your grandfather." I picked up the notebook curiously. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed at the edges. "What is it?" "His journal from medical school," my father explained. He kept detailed notes about his studies, his cases, his observations. But there are personal entries, too, about his struggles, his doubts. I carefully opened the fragile notebook, handling it with the reverence of someone accustomed to working with historical documents. My grandfather's handwriting was small and precise, filling the pages with both medical terminology and personal reflections. "I've never shown this to anyone," my father continued. "Not even your mother. But there's an entry in there from his second year of medical school that, well, I think you should read it." He reached over and carefully turned the pages until he found what he was looking for, then pointed to a specific passage. I began to read, October 15th, 1944. "Failed the cardiology practical exam today. Professor Ellison made it clear he doubts my suitability for surgery. Perhaps he is right. My hands trembled when it mattered most. Father would be ashamed to know his son might not carry on the Mitchell medical legacy. The weight of his expectations feels impossible to bear some days. Am I truly meant for this path, or am I merely following it because it is what is expected of me? I looked up at my father, understanding dawning. He had doubts, too. My father nodded. The great Harold Mitchell, the surgeon everyone revered, the man whose shadow I grew up in. He struggled with the same insecurities, the same fear of disappointing his father. He tapped the journal gently. Keep reading. I turned the page to find the continuation. October 20th, 1944. Spoke with Professor Ellison today. Instead of the dismissal I expected, he offered guidance. Medicine isn't about perfection, Mitchell, he said. It's about perseverance and humility, knowing when to push forward and when to ask for help. Perhaps there is wisdom there that extends beyond the operating theater. Father built his legacy on never showing weakness, but I wonder if there might be strength in vulnerability too. Perhaps the true Mitchell legacy should be not just excellence, but also the courage to acknowledge our limitations. Quote, "He never shared these doubts with me," my father said quietly. He presented only strength, only certainty. I grew up believing that's what made a Mitchell. Unwavering confidence, never admitting weakness or failure. He gestured to the journal. "It's yours now," I thought. I thought it might help you understand where it all came from. This toxic legacy of expectations that I perpetuated with you. I closed the journal carefully, touched by both the gift and what it represented. My father's attempt to break a generational pattern of emotional distance and impossible standards. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "This means a lot." My father shifted in his seat, clearly moving into uncomfortable emotional territory. "I've been thinking about what you said that night, about family being more than DNA, about how I let my own insecurities poison our relationship." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "I've spent my entire career saving lives, priding myself on never making fatal errors in surgery. But I failed at something far more important, being the father you deserved." The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the carefully constructed professional apology I might have expected from him, but something more genuine, messier, more human. "I can't change the past," he continued, "but I'd like the chance to be part of your future, to get to know the remarkable woman you've become, despite my failings." Before I could respond, the office door chimed again, and Zoe breezed in, her arms full of file folders. She stopped short when she saw my father. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you had a client this early," she apologized. "Not a client," I corrected her. "Zoe, this is my father, Dr. Richard Mitchell. Dad, this is Zoe Rivera, my right hand and the person who actually keeps this business running." My father stood and extended his hand with the formal courtesy that had been drilled into him since childhood. "A pleasure to meet you, Ms. Rivera. I've been admiring what my daughter has built here." Zoe's eyebrows shot up at this. She knew enough about my family dynamics to recognize the significance of such a statement. "It's all her vision," she said, shaking his hand. "I just help execute it." "Don't let her minimize her role," I told my father. "Zoe has a master's in genetic counseling and is brilliant with clients in emotional distress. Half of them specifically request her for follow-up sessions." Zoe flushed slightly at the praise. "I should get these files organized before our first appointment. Dr. Mitchell, it was nice to meet you." She disappeared into the back office, leaving us alone again. "You have a good team," my father observed. "Small but effective." I agreed. "We're actually looking to expand soon." The demand for genetic genealogy services has exploded in the past few years, especially with cold case work and identifying unknown remains for families. My father's expression grew thoughtful. "Tyler mentioned you were considering a larger office space." The casual reference to my brother discussing my business plans with our father was yet another indication of the shifting family dynamics. Before, Tyler and my father would have conversations about his career while I existed on the periphery. Now, it seemed, I was being included in their discussions even in my absence. "We're outgrowing this space," I confirmed. "I've been looking at a building in the historic district. More room for additional staff and equipment, plus better client meeting areas." My father nodded. "It sounds like a solid business decision." He hesitated, then added, If you need any assistance with the expansion, financially or otherwise, I'd be happy to help. 6 weeks ago, such an offer would have felt like a judgment, an implication that I couldn't succeed on my own, that I needed his intervention. Today, with the tentative new understanding between us, it felt more like what it actually was, a father offering support to his daughter's endeavors. I appreciate that, I said. The business is doing well enough to fund the expansion, but I might take you up on some advice about commercial property investment. That's more your area than mine. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I'd like that. My phone chimed with a reminder for an upcoming appointment. I hate to cut this short, but I have a client coming in soon. A woman who just discovered through DNA testing that her father isn't her biological parent. She's trying to decide whether to confront her family with the truth. The parallels to our own situation weren't lost on either of us. My father stood, gathering his empty coffee cup. What will you advise her? I considered the question seriously. That there's no universal right answer. That truth is generally better than secrets in the long run, but that timing and approach matter. That families are complicated, and healing takes time and effort from everyone involved. Wisdom born from experience, my father observed quietly. Something like that. I agreed, walking him to the door. He paused in the doorway, turning back to face me. Rebecca, would you and Tyler come to dinner this Sunday? Your mother's planning to make her lasagna, your favorite, if I remember correctly. Another small detail from my childhood that he had bothered to recall. I'd like that, I said. Thank you for coming by, Dad. And for the journal. After he left, I returned to my desk, carefully opening my grandfather's journal again. As I flipped through the pages, a small newspaper clipping fell out, yellowed with age and folded neatly. I unfolded it carefully to find a graduation announcement from Yale Medical School, dated 1946. My grandfather stood proud in his academic regalia, his expression serious but his eyes bright with accomplishment. What struck me wasn't the formal pose or the prestigious setting, but the handwritten note in the margin, in what I recognized as my grandfather's precise script. Remember, it is not the accolades that matter in the end, but the lives you touch and the difference you make. Excellence without compassion is an empty achievement, words of wisdom that had somehow been lost in transmission between generations of Mitchell men, until now. I carefully placed the clipping back into the journal, thinking about the complexity of family legacies, how easily wisdom can be distorted over time, how patterns of behavior can calcify into seemingly unbreakable traditions. The chime of the door announced my first client of the day. I tucked the journal into my desk drawer, promising myself I would read it thoroughly later, then rose to greet the nervous-looking woman who entered. She clutched a folder of DNA test results in one hand and tissues in the other, clearly prepared for an emotional session. Ms. Winters? I'm Rebecca Mitchell, I said, extending my hand. Why don't we sit down and talk about what brought you here today? As I listened to her story, so similar to my own in some ways, yet unique in others, I felt a renewed sense of purpose in my work. Every family had its secrets, its wounds, its unspoken truths. My role wasn't just to uncover biological connections, but to help people navigate the emotional terrain that came with those discoveries. I'm afraid of what this will do to our family, Ms. Winters confessed, her voice breaking. My father, the man who raised me, he's everything to me. Finding out he's not my biological father doesn't change that, but I'm afraid it might change how he sees me. I thought of my own father, of the journey we had begun just 3 weeks ago. The truth can be difficult, I acknowledged. But in my experience, both professional and personal, secrets tend to do more damage in the long run than honesty. You sound like you know from experience, she observed. I smiled. Let's just say I understand the complexities of family dynamics when biological connections aren't what we expected. I leaned forward slightly. But I also know that real family, the kind that matters, isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by love, by choice, by showing up for each other even when it's difficult. Ms. Winters dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. Do you really believe that? That DNA doesn't determine what makes a family? I do, I said, with conviction born from recent revelation. DNA is just science. Fascinating science, certainly, but just biological coding. Family is something deeper, something we build together through thousands of small moments of connection, forgiveness, and growth. By the time she left, Ms. Winters had a plan for approaching her family with her discovery, not with fear or accusation, but with an open heart and a desire for greater understanding. As I walked her to the door, she turned back with a grateful smile. "Thank you for helping me see this as an opportunity rather than just a crisis," she said. "You've given me hope that our family can emerge stronger from this, not broken." "That's the goal," I replied, thinking of my own family's ongoing journey toward healing. The rest of the day passed in a blur of client meetings, DNA analysis, and planning sessions for the company expansion. By the time I locked up the office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city streets. I decided to walk home, using the time to process everything that had happened that morning with my father. The cool evening air felt refreshing after a day spent indoors. As I walked, I pulled out my phone and called Tyler. "Hey sis," he answered, the background noise suggesting he was still at the hospital where he worked. "Everything okay?" Quote, "Dad came to see me at the office today," I said without preamble. "Really?" Tyler sounded genuinely surprised. "That's new." He brought coffee and croissants and Grandfather Mitchell's medical school journal. I still couldn't quite believe it myself. "Wow," Tyler said after a moment. "That's practically a declaration of love in Dad speak," I laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet street. "That's what I thought too." He invited us both to dinner on Sunday. Mom's making lasagna. "I'll be there," Tyler promised. "Hey, listen, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." His voice took on a more serious tone. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since your revelation at Dad's party." "About what?" I asked, pausing at a crosswalk. "About how I benefited from Dad's favoritism without ever questioning it. About how I saw how he treated you and never called him on it." The regret in his voice was palpable. "I was complicit, Becca. I'm sorry." The light changed and I crossed the street, considering his words. "You were a kid too, Tyler. We were both trapped in the roles Dad assigned us." "Maybe," he conceded, "but I'm not a kid anymore. I should have said something years ago." "We're saying something now," I pointed out. "All of us. That's what matters." After we hung up, I continued my walk home, reflecting on how much had changed in just 3 weeks. The truth I had uncovered, that had exploded our family narrative so dramatically on my father's birthday, had set in motion a process of healing that I couldn't have imagined possible. Not instantaneous healing, not perfect reconciliation, but the beginning of something authentic. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. "Your father told me about his visit to your office. He seemed genuinely impressed. Looking forward to Sunday dinner. Love you." Such a simple message, yet so profound in what it represented. My father discussing me with pride rather than disappointment, my mother acknowledging the shift, a family dinner approached with anticipation rather than dread. As I turned onto my street, I spotted an older couple walking hand in hand, their gray heads bent toward each other in comfortable conversation. Something about their easy intimacy, the way they moved in sync after decades together, made me think about the nature of family bonds, how they can bend without breaking, how they can transform over time. The DNA results that had seemed so earth-shattering 3 weeks ago now felt like just one part of a much larger story. The story of the Mitchell family learning, finally, to see each other clearly, to value connection over perfection, to choose love over rigid expectation. I climbed the steps to my apartment building, pausing to look up at the evening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. The truth, I realized, was both simpler and more complex than I had imagined. DNA might determine eye color and genetic predispositions, but it was our choices that defined who we truly were, as individuals and as a family. My father was not my biological father, but he was the man who had shaped me, through both his approval and his disapproval. Tyler was my half-brother genetically, but wholly my brother in every way that mattered. And somewhere out there was a man who had contributed to my biological existence without ever knowing me, without influencing the person I had become. The revelation at my father's 70th birthday party hadn't just changed our family's understanding of our genetic connections. It had created an opportunity for us to redefine what family meant to us. To build something new from the rubble of old expectations and resentments. Something imperfect but genuine. Something built on truth rather than pretense. As I unlocked my apartment door, I thought about the DNA results still tucked away in my desk drawer at work. They had answered one question, but the more important questions, about forgiveness, about growth, about the capacity for change, those were still being answered, day by day, choice by choice. And for the first time in my life, I was genuinely hopeful about what those answers might be. Not because my father had suddenly transformed into the perfect parent, or because 3 decades of emotional neglect could be erased in 3 weeks of effort, but because we were all, finally, willing to see the truth about ourselves and each other. Willing to do the hard work of building a real family, one honest conversation at a time. In my line of work, I had seen how DNA discoveries could tear families apart or bring them together. How the same truth could be destructive or healing, depending on how people chose to respond to it. The Mitchell family had been given that choice on my father's 70th birthday, and against all odds, we were choosing healing. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, old patterns reasserting themselves, moments of doubt and frustration. But we had taken the first steps on a new path, one that acknowledged our complicated history while refusing to be defined by it. One that recognized that family, real family, was something we created together, not something determined by genetic code alone. And that, I realized as I settled into my apartment for the evening, was the greatest discovery of all, more significant than any DNA test result could ever be. The knowledge that it's never too late to rewrite your family's story. Never too late to choose truth over comfortable lies. Never too late to become the family you were always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.